Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your patronage, and I would love it if you could leave me a 5-star review because that really helps me. And if you could like and share this episode with somebody that you know that may benefit, your friend, your colleague, anyone, I'd really love you to share this podcast, especially if you find value in the Muslim Sex Podcast. Also, I'd love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on all my social media. Also, as you probably know, if you've been listening to this podcast, is that I have a practice that is now open in Chappaqua, New York. I see patients for menopause and sexual health, as well as regular gynecology. So if you are looking for a gynecologist that actually spends time with you, that has time to listen to you, then I would invite you to come and see me in my practice, and I'd be more than happy to take care of you. So make sure if you live in the New York area, or even if you don't, come and see me in my office. I'd love to meet you. And also, last but not least, is that I am hosting again my retreat in Morocco for 2025. So if you are looking for a gift for a family member, a friend, yourself, make sure you take a look at our retreat, the Love and Nourish retreat. It will be held September 19th through the 26th, 2025. Again, this year in Morocco, we will be visiting the same towns. We will be in Marrakesh and Essaouira. And as always, we will be providing information and lectures on menopause, perimenopause, nutrition, and also going for cooking classes as well as excursions. So don't miss out. I know a lot of people were sad when they missed out this past year on the Morocco retreat. So make sure that you go and visit the Love and Nourish retreat hosted by Caria Retreats. And now onto the episode. I am an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf, and this episode is everything you need to know about sex and intimacy and Islam. Now, I don't cover everything, and this is a special episode for all the Muslims out there that may be interested, and for anyone that's not Muslim, right? I think it's important just to know about other religions and cultures and what they believe. And, if you're a practitioner, if you're a provider, whatever, it's just important. And really anyone, doesn't matter who you are. It's always fun and interesting to learn about other people's cultures and what they say about different topics. So here I am. I'm going to present a little bit. This is not all encompassing, meaning like I don't cover all the topics. I just briefly cover a few of the topics. And then I ask that you, if you're interested in more, DM me, let me know so that I can then take one of those topics and expand on it and talk more about it. So if you're interested, let me know. All right. So this is definitely not meant to be any type of medical advice. If you have any questions about intimacy, then please speak with your healthcare provider or your sex med doc or your pelvic floor therapist, someone that can help you out. And if you have any questions about your religion, definitely please go do your own research. This is not meant to be any type of religious advice. So, you make your own decisions and do your own research so that you are well informed and empowered. And this is called the Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman that talks about sex. So let's get into it. This is going to be a juicy topic, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you like the conversation. And let me know if there's something in here that you want me to focus on. So what we're going to do is today I'm going to talk to you, have an open and honest educational conversation about intimacy, relationship, and sexual health, all through the lens of basically Islamic values. I think that this isn't really an episode that I've ever really done before. And again, this is not meant to be religious advice. So please, if you have any questions about any of what I am talking about and you're not sure, please go look it up and find out if that's something that your school of thought things or not. Okay. We're going to be diving into some fascinating topics such as masturbation, orgasms, oral sex, sex toys, foreplay, arousal, post sex hygiene, all that stuff. And remember, I'm just talking a little bit, just briefly touching on the surface. I haven't gone into too many too in depth. So if you need me to go in depth, please let me know. Email me, message me, and I can focus on it in a future podcast episode. So they're often, these topics are often misunderstood or stigmatized in different communities. And we know that in Islam, we know that education is definitely paramount. And we know that one of the traditions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is that the seeking of knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim, be it man or woman. So really important. And we know we have little prayers that we say where we are asking God to increase our knowledge. And so really important. And in fact, we know one of the first things that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was taught, or the first word that he was, taught to read was called read. And he was told to read. And so we know that education and reading and learning, all of these things are super important to anyone, and especially if you are a Muslim, that is something that is very important to you as a person and in your learning and in your growth process. Okay. So really important. We know that Islam encourages knowledge and healthy relationships, but we can address these topics with compassion and evidence-based information grounded in our faith. And I think that's really what's the key thing, and it's important. So we know that Islam emphasizes mutual respect and dignity in marital relationships. And we know that for us as Muslims, we typically, not typically, but we're encouraged to only have sex inside of a marital relationship, right? So we're not supposed to be having sex outside of marriage. So that's why, this topic is really important, I think. But sexual intimacy is based on kindness and consideration and aligning with, the Quranic verse that says that they are garments and you are their garments. And I think that, a lot of these texts are taken from the Quran, which is, for those that may not know, the Quran is our religious book. And, we know that those are the words of God. And so it's really important for us to understand how they relate to relationships. In Islam, neither the spouse has a right to force the other into any sexual act, and consent is key to fulfilling the principles of compassion and mutual satisfaction. So we know that, and that's also very important to understand that there's marital rape is such a thing, and that can happen anywhere in any relationship, in any type of culture or religion or anything like that, we understand that can happen, but we know also that, what Islam says, and that, sex should not be forced. So, listen, let's talk about something, a topic, and I mentioned this also in one of my other podcasts when I talked about self-love and exploration and all this stuff. I talked a little bit about masturbation. I'm going to just talk about it a little bit more here because I think that this is a topic that is really a lot of people have a tough time with. And, we're not sure what, different schools of thought will say and whether or not it's allowed or not allowed in Islam. And so it sparks a lot of debate in, different communities, and scholars differ in their opinions. Okay. So I want you to know there are definitely different schools of thought. As we know, in the Sunni school of thought, there are 4 major schools of thought in the Sunni sect of Islam, and in the Shia sect of Islam, there's one major one. It's called Jafri. In the Sunni, it is Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi, and Maliki. Those are the 4 schools of thought over there, and really important to know what if you follow a certain school of thought, just kind of follow it all the way through, right? Just see what that school of thought says regarding different topics. And so I'm just going to say a little bit here. Most say, right? So most schools of thought will say that masturbation is not allowed in Islam. And I think that That's typically what we hear. In fact, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, and she was like, "Oh no, absolutely not. It's not allowed, this and that." And, I'm sure that that was what her school of thought and what her readings had taught her, is that it was absolutely not allowed. Some scholars say that masturbation is used as a last resort to prevent adultery or even just fornication, right? It doesn't have to be adultery, it doesn't, but like fornication as a means of sexual release. So rather than a source of enjoyment, so that if you have all of this sexual tension that's built up and you need a release, that masturbation is allowed, but that it should never really replace, your spouse, or if you're married, or, in that sense. So that's so there are others, right, that have that school of thought. I remember, again, and I told this story in a previous podcast, but I just remember going to these Muslim conferences when I was younger, and that this topic would come up all the time because this was a concern, right? This is a concern for, you know, people growing up, or people that are not married or whatever. They don't want to be doing something that's wrong or sinful or dirty or shameful, or, there's a lot of guilt with this as well that's associated. But at the same time, there has to be a way for them to release that sexual energy. Now, the Prophet, peace be upon him, did say that if somebody is, the fasting was one way of curbing, a sexual appetite, right? Like if you're not married and you have these needs, that fasting is a way to kind of decrease that sexual need. However, I think that a lot of people would like some type of release. And if they're not able to have sex outside of marriage and they're not married, then, masturbation. So some clerics, or religious leaders will say that that's allowed, that women, that perhaps if their spouses are off at war, or if they're a widow, or if they're not married or whatever, it's that female masturbation was allowed. And there was a cleric in Morocco, his name is Abd al-Bari al-Zamzami, who in 2016 stated that, it was allowed, and people went crazy. They went like nuts. They were like, oh my God, you're saying masturbation is allowed, whatever. And, his point was that there had to be some type of release where people were not committing, sex outside of marriage, where if, and they needed that, that should be allowed. So he suggested that, women could masturbate to relieve their sexual desires and use it as a means to prevent them from committing adultery. And so I think that, whatever your views are, it's important to speak with your religious scholar or read up on your school of thought, and then take action based on that. Of course, this episode or this podcast is definitely not any form of religious, fatwa or anything like that, right? I'm not giving you that. I'm just telling you what different schools of thought say. And it, kind of goes from like absolutely not allowed at all under any condition to perhaps there's time and space for this to be allowed. So the majority of the Hanafi and Shafi schools consider it makruh or discouraged unless it is to avoid falling into fornication. Others, like certain Hanbali scholars, actually believe it is permissible under certain specific circumstances. What's clear is that masturbation should never become an addiction or replacement for a healthy marital relationship. And I think that's key. Islam emphasizes controlling desires, but also acknowledges human nature. And I think that that is really what's important here. And that's all I'm going to say about masturbation. But I just think it's important to bring it up because we can't not talk about it. And I think that it is important to talk about things like that. So let's talk about orgasms next. Now, when we talk about orgasms, we know it's obviously a natural and beautiful part of intimacy. Islam, of course, encourages spouses to mutually satisfy each other, right? So if you are in a marital relationship, it's really important for a man to be able to satisfy his wife and vice versa. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, emphasized this teaching to men to ensure that their wives were also pleased during intimacy. We know that 10 to 15% of women have never had an orgasm. And in fact, the orgasm gap, which states that heterosexual men tend to orgasm 95% of the time in partner sex, whereas heterosexual women tend to orgasm 65% of the time. And now, some reasons for this discrepancy is the lack of knowledge of the anatomy, right? We know that. And that is actually a huge problem, especially for those individuals that have never had sex education, or perhaps they're in a country or a culture wherever that does not talk about sex, doesn't talk about sex education. And then those individuals are never able to learn about sex. And not only that, they don't have access. Not only that, they're told that sex is wrong, dirty, shameful, or even looking at themselves as wrong, dirty, shameful. So they just don't know. They don't know what they have. I mean, I've had women in my clinic come and say that they thought there were four, that they were surprised that there were three holes that a woman had, right? Her urethra, where she urinates from, the vagina, where she can deliver a baby out of, and the rectum, where she poops from. So, lots of education. This isn't, this is with like regular American folks here, right here in the US. It wasn't like I went to like a foreign country and was talking to those individuals there. I was talking to people that have been raised here who didn't realize that they had three holes. So really important to know that we are really lacking in our accurate sex education that we provide to children, but also to adults, and that more education needs to be done on that front. But anyway, so some reasons why a lot of women will say that they've never experienced an orgasm is that perhaps they don't know their own anatomy, or their partner doesn't know their anatomy. Lack of women's entitlement to partnered pleasure, right? A lot of times when, especially young women, when they get into a relationship, will not prioritize their pleasure. They'll really just, especially if they're in a new relationship, they want to just please their partner, and will just focus on their partner's pleasure, not on their own. Distractions during intercourse. We know that, and I've talked about this several times, about when we are not mindful in our physical intimacy, we're focused and we're talking or we're thinking about 50 other things, right? You're not going to orgasm. You're preoccupied about like the dishes, the kids, the laundry, the work, whatever else you have going on, maybe 4 podcasts that you're recording all in one day. Then you're really not focused on this intimate encounter that you're having. And you're not able to experience that orgasm, right? Or being in a committed relationship. Perhaps somebody's not in a committed relationship, and so they don't really feel safe, and so then they're not able to experience that orgasm. So really, these are all the different situations and reasons why perhaps a person, perhaps a woman, may not be able to orgasm. And so, we also know that sometimes it can take longer for a woman to orgasm, and that she needs clitoral stimulation, and that there takes a lot of patience and understanding on the part of the partner, but also it takes understanding of the anatomy, which is not always a given. So that's really important, right? So if you are in a new relationship, or if you're just newly married, I want you to honestly open up like a textbook and go over the anatomy with your spouse, and you go over it. First, you learn about your own anatomy, then you go and you teach your spouse, because I can guarantee you, one, you probably don't know about your own anatomy, and two, that your partner doesn't know. And this is very common in very conservative cultures where, the partners have not had any experience outside of marriage, and they don't know about their own anatomy, and they don't know they don't know what they like. They don't know what they want. They've never experienced pleasure. And so all of this is just to say that knowledge is power, and you need to empower yourself to experience pleasure in your relationship. Okay. Now, what exactly is an orgasm? So an orgasm is described as when a person reaches peak pleasure. It's the release of built up tension during the sexual response cycle and bringing about rhythmic, involuntary muscular contractions in the pelvic region, which is associated with pleasure. orgasm can happen through, psychological means. And for females, the muscles in the vagina and anus may contract roughly once per second for about 5 to 8 times. Okay, the heart rate may increase, the breathing rate may increase, and what's important is that before and during the orgasm, the vagina may become lubricated. And for some women, it doesn't. So there doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It could mean that you have low hormones, like for example, perimenopause, menopause, that can happen. Also, if there's, when sometimes a woman may not become lubricated, and even though she may be aroused, and that could be what we call arousal non-concordance. And why that happens sometimes is that it could be due to hormones. It could be due to perimenopause, menopause. It could be due to the decline in estrogen, that she's not able to get lubricated, because we need that estrogen. The estrogen provides that lubrication. And that's why vaginal estrogen is so important during our later part, our latter half of our years. And also, women that are breastfeeding may not experience lubrication. Women that have a psychological disconnect from their, body may not be able to, when they're not mindful, right? So if you're not mindful in this experience where you're having sex, you may not be able to be lubricated. So that's called arousal non-concordance, where basically you may feel aroused, but your body is not lubricated. So your partner may think that you don't want sex, but that's not the case. It's just that there might be a reason for you not being able to get lubricated. Or what can happen in sexual trauma, right? If somebody's being raped, they may have lubrication, but doesn't mean they want it, right? And so that's where a lot of this, women that have experienced trauma or abuse, their abuser will say, well, no, you liked what was happening because you were lubricated. But that's not the case. The case is physiologically, they may have been lubricated because of what was happening. They may have been having, they were being touched in a certain way, but psychologically, they were not aroused. They didn't want it, right? But their abuser or whoever took advantage of them told them that they liked what was happening because they were lubricated. So that's really important. And that's why I spent a little bit of time on this arousal non-concordance. So basically what can happen is sometimes you can be aroused and not be lubricated, or you can be lubricated but not aroused and not want it, right? So important to make that distinction. And that's why I spent a little bit of time. Directly after an orgasm, the clitoris may feel more sensitive or uncomfortable to touch. Women do not have the same refractory period as men and can have intercourse shortly after orgasm. Now, that may not feel so comfortable to all women because they may be hypersensitive in the clitoris or the vulva, and stimulation may be uncomfortable. But it's important to know that women, they can orgasm multiple times in one session. And some women have experienced multiple orgasms at one time, and there are different types of orgasms. So I'm just going to kind of go over really briefly the different types of orgasm that there are. And just so you know, whoever is listening to this podcast episode, what is available to you, okay? And the different types. So you can have a clitoral orgasm. This is when the orgasm occurs due to stimulation of the clitoris. And a 2019 article noted that 60% of female orgasms occur due to clitoral stimulation. And I would say that probably even more than that, because most women need to have clitoral stimulation to orgasm. Not all, but a lot. A lot of women need to have that clitoral stimulation. A woman can have a vaginal orgasm. This is when the orgasm occurs due to vaginal stimulation. So the American Psychological Association states that the vaginal orgasms are actually related to the indirect stimulation of the clitoris during sex. So what's important to understand is that the clitoris, what we see of the clitoris, is really the tip of the iceberg, as I like to call it. And that whole clitoral network actually spans over the top of the vagina. And it's what was discovered, what was called the G zone, right? It was the anterior portion of the vagina. And that's why they're saying that the vaginal orgasm really occurs because of its indirect connection with the clitoris. And it's really due to the clitoral stimulation that when you experience penetration, that orgasm occurs as a result of that clitoral stimulation that was already done. You can have a blended orgasm. This is when this occurs when you have both clitoral and vaginal orgasm occur together. Some people can experience G-spot orgasm. That's a little bit what I was talking about. An orgasm can occur as a result of stimulation of the G-spot, which is on the anterior surface of the vagina. But some people can experience multiple orgasms over a short period of time. And that's actually what I just talked about. Masters and Johnson noted that females have a shorter recovery period, which allows them to experience multiple orgasms in a shorter amount of time. Imagery-induced orgasms that occur as a response to imagery without physical stimulation. That's really interesting. And this can occur as a result of self-induced imagery. And some people can also orgasm from nipple stimulation. So a person may reach an orgasm due to stimulation of the nipples alone. Stimulation of the nipples can activate the part of the brain that also activates with genital stimulation. So all of that is really interesting. Also, what I think is interesting is that nipple stimulation causes oxytocin to be released from the brain, which can cause contractions in the uterus, right? So it's almost like this nipple orgasm, which are like contractions of the uterus. And the reason why I bring that up is because some women that are pregnant and are trying to go into labor, toward the end of their pregnancy, will try this nipple stimulation to get contractions going. It's interesting because sometimes that nipple stimulation can cause hyperstimulation of the uterus, meaning like they start to have too many contractions all at once. So really be careful if you are trying this nipple stimulation to get yourself to try to go into labor, because you don't want to overstimulate that uterus and have what we call like these tetanic contractions, which are these long, prolonged contractions that can cause a decrease in fetal heart rate, which can cause problems. But anyways, that would you'd only see that this decrease in the fetal heart rate is if you were being monitored in a hospital and they were doing this continuous monitoring while in labor. But I find that to be interesting because oxytocin, we know, is considered the love hormone, the cuddle hormone. It responds to touch. And so this nipple stimulation causes this release of this oxytocin hormone to happen, which causes the contractions. So really interesting. So learn your anatomy and physiology and all of that good stuff, and you'll learn all this. We know that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that when one person has intercourse with his wife, let him be considerate. And if he basically orgasms before her, so he says in the tradition that if he fulfills his desire before her, he should not hurry until she fulfills her desire. Basically, this highlights the importance of mutual satisfaction. So I think that is super, super important to understand, especially I feel that, sometimes people are not taught. So, I don't know, for those that may not know, women actually have sexual rights in Islam. And for those people that were raised with sex negativity and don't even know that Islam is such a sex positive religion, may not have even known that women have sexual rights in Islam, and that really sexual satisfaction for a wife is just as important as sexual satisfaction for the husband. So really important to know and understand that. Okay, so I have gotten DMs in the past about talking about oral sex. So people want to know about oral sex, and I'm not going to get into details about oral sex, but what I want people to know is that definitely it's another sensitive topic that a lot of scholars agree is permissible between spouses as long as there's consent and does not involve anything that's harmful or degrading. And the Quran, which is our religious book, it describes, again, marriage as a place of comfort and intimacy. And that this really emphasizes the closeness and comfort and mutual pleasure. So the key is maintaining respect, hygiene, and consent. It's also important to avoid anything that violates Islamic principles. So, there's some talk about consuming impurities, which is considered to be like semen or vaginal fluid. So generally speaking, oral sex is permissible in Islam between a husband and a wife as long as neither swallow semen or vaginal fluid. Okay, and is done with mutual consent of both spouses. So that's really important to know and understand. And of course, as with anything I'm saying, if you have any questions, please go do your own research and look up your own school of thought and see what it says. Now, regarding sex toys and lubricants, are they allowed? So the general rule is that anything that enhances marital intimacy and does not involve haram practices is permissible. So you have to know what those principles are that are not allowed in Islam, so that you can practice the things that are allowed. So, that's really the important thing there. Sex toys can be used by couples to improve their experience, right? But they should never replace the spouse. So that's where that comes in. Lubricants. Now, let's talk a little bit about lubricants because I think it's really important to know and understand what's available to you. And they can definitely increase comfort and pleasure. And Islam encourages spouses to engage in intimacy that's fulfilling for both, right? And so remember, we've talked about this a lot of times where anytime something is painful, you're not going to want it, right? So we know that in perimenopause, menopause, you have decreased lubrication because of the decrease in estrogen. And so, a lot of times people will use lubricants, and that those lubricants can help you to enjoy the physical intimacy that you're having with your partner. Remember, it's also important that you have open communication with your partner, and this is definitely important in your relationship. So, let's talk a little bit about the different types of lubricants that you have available to you that are available in most pharmacies. One is, let's start with the water-based lubricants. So that's the most common type that lubricant that it is primarily made with water. It's compatible with condoms and sex toys, easy to clean, non-staining, washes off with water. It's gentle on the skin. It's suitable for sensitive areas, and it's widely available. So that's important, and it's affordable. The cons are that definitely it dries out much faster, and you'll have to reapply. And it's not ideal for water-based activities, obviously, if you're using a water-based lubricant. Silicone-based lubricants. Now, these are made from silicone, and these lubes are thicker and last longer. So they're long-lasting. They don't dry out. They're excellent for water-based activities. They're silky and smooth. They're hypoallergenic and safe for sensitive skin. The con is that if you are using silicone toys, you should not be using a silicone lubricant, okay? Because it can degrade, so the silicone lubricant can degrade the silicone sex toy. That's why that you don't combine the two silicones together. It's harder to clean off. So if you get the lubricant, the silicone lubricant, it's harder to clean off. Requires soap and water to wash off, and sometimes it can stain sheets and clothing. Oil-based lubricants. So this is the third most common type of lubricant, and it's made with natural or synthetic oils, such as coconut oil. The pros are it's long-lasting, doesn't require frequent application, provides a silky smooth texture. Natural oils like coconut oil can be moisturizing and soothing. The con is that it's not compatible with latex condoms because the oil can break the condom or weaken it. Okay, so that's why that's important to know. So if you're listening to this episode, maybe just take notes, okay, about the different type of lubricants that you can use so that you can remember them, because I myself forget. So I know that, sometimes it's helpful to do take notes and kind of refreshers. Also, with these oil-based lubricants, they can clog up pores and can increase the risk of infection or cause irritation. And they can be harder to wash off and sometimes can stain fabrics, right? So really important to just know that if you're going to use a lubricant, what kind of lubricant you're using and what type of activity are you planning with that lubricant, just so that you're aware, right? It's all about knowledge and empowerment, and for you to basically have agency over your own sexuality and your own pleasure. There are hybrid lubricants. So there's a mix of water-based and silicone-based lubricants. It combines the benefits of both water and silicone-based. It lasts longer. It's easier to clean than pure silicone lubes, and it can be compatible with condoms and with most sex toys. They can still stain, though, some fabrics, and they're not as easy to find as pure water or pure silicone lubricants. Then you have the natural or organic lubricants, and they are plant based, are natural ingredients. And I like, to me, that sounds like, the coconut oil. But anyways, they're different types, right? So they're made ideal for people with sensitive skin or allergies. They're free from harsh chemicals, parabens, artificial fragrances. Many are eco-friendly and biodegradable, so these are important. So it's hard to remember, but the most thing is listen, just choose the right lubricant for you, and look at what it is that you're planning on doing, and then pick the lubricant that's right for that activity, right? So water-based is versatile, silicone is long-lasting and thicker and works better. You have to check for allergies, so avoid products with fragrances, parabens, or glycerin if you have sensitive skin. Condom and toy compatibility, use water or hybrid based lubes with latex condoms and silicone toys. And, just try different things, right? Just try different lubricants with different types of play, and then you'll see what works best for you. Now, let's talk a little bit about foreplay. So, foreplay is not just recommended in Islam, it's actually emphasized. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that he was known to engage in foreplay with his wife, and setting an example of gentleness and care. And that's why it's really important to know that foreplay helps to build arousal. It's essential for both partners to fully enjoy intimacy. This includes kissing, touching, other forms of stimulation. For women, especially, arousal can take time. So patience is super important, and understanding from both partners. Some things that help with foreplay can be, and it depends on who you are as a person, but maybe some people like, setting the mood, maybe the lights, candles, kind words, gestures, taking time to explore each other's preferences. That's why I kind of like sensate focus. And if you don't know what sensate focus is, I would ask you to listen to that podcast on sensate focus, and see how that really can help with foreplay. And focus on areas that heighten arousal, such as the neck, the inner thighs. This is where mindfulness and sensate focus really can come into play and be great. So that's why I highly recommend it for those, especially those people that have never been intimate before and really want kind of like a slow, stepwise process to becoming intimate with their partner or having sex with their partner, is to use that sensate focus, because it really gives you a stepwise process in how you can have sex. And I think for a lot of people, when they get married, the pressure is on to, consummate their wedding and then have a child and this and that and blah, blah. And I think that can be overwhelming for people that have never been in a relationship. One, been in a relationship with somebody else. Two, have had sex with somebody. And if they don't know, if they're not comfortable with their own bodies, with other people's bodies, with another person's body, then I think it can be really stressful. And I think that those kind of things, honestly, can lead to vaginismus and unconsummated weddings, and also and marriages, and that kind of stress, and just not knowing your own body or knowing another person's body can also lead to premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction, and a lot of things, right? A lot of things that we don't talk about. And I think that knowing your body, knowing what it can do, how you can experience pleasure, taking it slow, using modalities such as sensate focus and mindfulness, all of these things can only enhance your pleasure and your education and empower you so that you have agency over your body and over your own sexual health. So I think that's why that's really important. All right. So post-sex hygiene, what are we talking about? So a lot of times people will, wash up after they have sex. I always say for women that I think it's good if they are able to, those squirty bottles that sometimes women will get after they have a child. They'll give those, the hospital will give them a little like squeezy bottle where they can pour water on their vulva region to keep it clean. I think that's always a good idea. Water is always a good idea for post-hygiene cleanup. Some women like to take showers, which is great. Islamically, though, you really should have, we have what's, specifically a post-sex hygiene is critical part of intimacy in Islam. And so after sex, after both spouses, they have to perform what's called a ghusl, which is like a ritual bath. To regain both that physical and spiritual cleanliness. And I know they have something like this, actually Orthodox Jews, but they do that for after they have their period. They do like a ritual bath, a ritual cleansing. This is kind of like a similar idea where you're doing like a ritual cleansing after, but this is after you have sex. And also after we have our period too, it's important to do this as well. So just important to learn what it is. And basically, the steps, I'll just kind of briefly talk about them. And I think that if you're interested in learning more about this and what it is, then, make sure that you look it up and, make sure that you know what to do after you have sex and after actually your period as well. So the steps for this ghusl are, you make the intention to that you're, basically everything in Islam, it starts with an intention. So you're making this intention that you're, doing this post-sex or post-period cleansing, and then you wash your privates thoroughly, and you perform wudu, which is called ablution. I don't know how to say it in English, anyways, you perform wudu. And and it's basically the ritual cleansing, right? So you're just washing your body. And you wash the entire body, ensuring water reaches every part. So really the key in there is that, in Islam, there is a ritual cleansing after you have sex with your husband or, wife, whatever. And that it is the whole point is to kind of cleanse you both spiritually and physically. It's just to purify you. So to regain that physical and spiritual cleanliness after you have sex. It's also recommended to clean the genital area and urinate after sex to reduce the risk of infections and, prevent UTIs. A lot of women can sometimes get UTIs after sex. So if you just, get in the habit of cleansing yourself after you have sex, hopefully it'll reduce the risk of infections, of getting a UTI. Right. And keeping clean is really part of maintaining a healthy, loving, and spiritual relationship, really, for us. So now that we've covered, and I've covered so much stuff today, and I hope you were taking notes. So we've covered intimacy and lubricants and foreplay and lots of great topics. And I hope that you know that Islam views intimacy as a beautiful and sacred act between the spouses. And it's actually having sex with your spouse is actually considered an act of worship. And that's really important to realize and understand. And, that's why we do a little prayer before we have sex. And it's really important to understand that. And it's a means of love and mercy and even worship, like I said. So it's really important to normalize these conversations and educate ourselves about sexuality in a way that, aligns with our faith, but really for anyone that wants to learn more about Islam. And of course, again, I'm going to mention this, that this is not meant to be any type of religious advice. So if you have any questions about anything that I said, please do your own research, look it up, make sure that you are going based on your school of thought if you have a particular one that you follow. And really important to be able to discuss these topics. If you have any questions, or you want me to delve into more of these type of topics, or if there was a particular topic you wanted to learn more about, let me know and I'll do the research and I'll come back onto the podcast and talk more about that topic. So, I am done here, and it has been real and really intimate, and especially this topic has been really intimate. So again, not meant to be any type of religious or medical advice. If you have any questions, please speak with those specific individuals. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a review, share and like the podcast. And if you leave me a review, I'd love to shout you out on social media. So be sure that you share it with all your friends. And thanks for listening.